Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Marc Show. This is your place on the dial for our weekly discussion of the important legal and political issues of the day. You're welcome to call in at 717-540-0580, at 717-540-0580. You can send me a tweet at Marc and I'll read your tweet on the air. You can check out my columns, my prior podcasts of the show. You can take a look at some great merchandise we have. Check out the MarcScaringiShow.com website. And today we're broadcasting on Harrisburg 100 Facebook Live. Again, hopefully my friends on Harrisburg 100 can hear us and be able to comment live. If you'd like to call in, you're listening on the radio, 717-540-0580. Well, the attention of the nation is once again focused on our nation's capital in Washington, D.C. The United States Senate will very shortly begin a vote on the confirmation of Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the United States Supreme Court. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has scheduled a vote to occur between 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock this afternoon. And it looks like the Republicans have the sufficient number of votes to put Kavanaugh through and onto the Supreme Court. The nation was focused on Washington yesterday when United States Senator Susan Collins, a Republican of Maine, took to the Senate floor. She had long been a holdout in determining and publicizing whether she would vote for or against Kavanaugh in the weeks and days leading up to the actual vote. So many Republicans were very concerned as to whether or not Susan Collins would come down on their side or against them in this critical vote. But yesterday, she took to the Senate floor and gave an impassioned and reasoned and logical analysis of the allegations raised by Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, the response by Judge Brett Kavanaugh, and an analysis of the evidence and the credibility of the witnesses. And she talked a lot about the presumption of innocence. And she characterized Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's testimony as sincere, painful, and compelling. And notice she did not say credible. And when she didn't utter that word, a lot of pundits and talking heads reached the conclusion that she would vote for the procedural motion to put the Kavanaugh vote through, and then today she would vote in favor of the confirmation of Kavanaugh. Senator Collins talked about how the four witnesses that Dr. Ford identified all denied the allegation, denied knowing about the party, denied knowing her best friend, Leland Kaiser, denied not only knowing about the party, but denied knowing Brett Kavanaugh. And Senator Ford focused in on how Senator Collins focused in on how Dr. Christine Blasey Ford didn't know how she got home, and that no one has come forward to say that they gave her a ride, and that no one, not even her closest friend, called her the next day to find out why she left abruptly from this house party of 36 years ago somewhere in suburban Maryland, and that not even her best friend called her to ask her why she allegedly fled the party. These were the facts that Senator Susan Collins, Republican of Maine, focused on in her historic speech that she gave yesterday on the floor of the United States Senate. Senator Collins talked about how fairness dictates the claims at least should be able to meet the civil standard for preponderance of the evidence. And Collins was making the point that there really aren't any rules in the Senate that govern the burden of proof or the standards that the senators should apply when determining and trying to decipher allegations such as these. It's not a civil court. It's not a criminal court where we know what the burdens of proof are. We know what the standards that have to be met by the litigants are. We don't know that in the United States Senate in a confirmation hearing. The Constitution just says the Senate shall advise and consent. And so Susan Collins, Senator Collins, was stating that, well, she has arrived at her own method or standard of evaluating the allegations raised by Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, and Senator Collins indicated she would apply a preponderance of the evidence standard and concluded that the evidence just simply did not reach that low level necessary for a litigant to prevail in civil courts. And so Susan Collins concluded that the charges raised by Dr. Ford should not, it wouldn't be fair to use these charges to keep Judge Kavanaugh from the court. And then Susan Collins, senator from Maine, also blasted Julie Swetnick for her outlandish allegation. Remember, Julie Swetnick is the accuser found by the creepy porn lawyer Michael Avenatti, Stormy Daniels' attorney, and also a potential candidate for the Democratic nomination to challenge President Trump in his reelection bid. Michael Avenatti has been on every news show that exists on this earth, and he brought up the Julie Swetnick. Julie Swetnick made these allegations that were so far-fetched. I concluded, and many others did, that would really hurt Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's allegations because people would kind of lump them all together, and the outrageousness of the Swetnick allegations would help to sink the Ford allegations. And apparently that's the conclusion reached by United States Senator Susan Collins. Collins referred to the Swetnick allegations as outlandish and said it's the propagation by activists seeking to stop Kavanaugh's nomination. And it's a stark reminder about why the presumption of innocence is so ingrained in our American consciousness. So that was United States Senator Susan Collins, and she carried the day for the procedural vote in favor of moving the Kavanaugh nomination to the floor for a full vote by the United States Senate that will occur in a matter of just about 2 hours. Hollywood, of course, went apoplectic in response to Susan Collins' speech, from Kathy Griffin to Rosie O'Donnell, Alyssa Milano, Rob Reiner, and others. Some just launched into a torrid cascade of expletives and vulgarities. Many of these I can't repeat on the air from Rosie O'Donnell and Kathy Griffin. But the gist of these screeds by the left in Hollywood, which is most of Hollywood, is that Susan Collins, as a woman, had a duty to stand by the woman, Dr. Ford, who had accused Brett Kavanaugh of these sex assault allegations, and that Susan Collins, as a woman, failed all women in America, that Susan Collins turned her back to sexual assault survivors because she concluded that the Ford allegations did not satisfy the low-level burden of proof necessary in civil courts. The Women's March, which Dr. Ford had participated in, called United States Senator Susan Collins a rape apologist. We'll talk more about the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings, the speech by Susan Collins, when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Marc Scaringi Show.
Now, more of Marc Scaringi on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to The Marc Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism here on WHP 580, iHeartRadio, and Harrisburg 100 Facebook Live. We're talking today about the confirmation vote that is coming up in the next couple of hours down in the United States Senate in Washington, D.C. for Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the United States Supreme Court. Republicans are confident they have the number of votes they need to put Kavanaugh across the goal line and onto the United States Supreme Court. The critical play that occurred yesterday was delivered by United States Senator Susan Collins, Republican of Maine, a moderate, a perceived moderate, someone who Republicans were very concerned would not be able to come out in favor of the Kavanaugh nomination. She's a woman, obviously, and has been under tremendous pressure by women's groups across the country to vote against the Kavanaugh nomination. And she came out in I thought a beautifully written and delivered speech yesterday on the floor of the United States Senate, talking about how we have to have rules and standards by which we govern and judge allegations such as these. This is very different from how did the judge decide a particular case on the D.C. Circuit Court. It's allegations from his days in high school, and it's not a court of law. You don't where you would have the rules of civil procedure, rules of criminal procedure, standards for determining evidence, burdens of proof that the litigants must satisfy. We don't have any of that in a Senate confirmation hearing. And Susan Collins was saying that she's going to apply the preponderance of evidence standard. And then she reached the conclusion that Dr. Christine Blasey Ford did not satisfy that standard, and as such, it would be unfair to deny Kavanaugh the nomination because he's eminently qualified for the position based upon his legal mind, his legal skills, his judicial skills, his experience, and his academic pedigree. He's off the charts on that aspect of his nomination, but it would be unfair to deny him the nomination based upon these unsubstantiated allegations. And Susan Collins kind of zeroed in also on the outlandish allegations made by Julie Swetnick, represented by Michael Avenatti, Stormy Daniels' attorney, and how that in my view, that may have tainted the allegations made by Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. Now, I've written and spoken a lot in my columns on Penn Live, on the Scaringi Law lunch break videos that we send out daily, talking about how actually when you study and examine the testimony of Dr. Ford, she lacks any credibility, and any tough prosecutor or attorney who would have conducted that direct or cross-examination should have examined her for bias and motive. Had they done that, she would have done very poorly. The witness, that is, Dr. Ford, and it would have revealed really what her allegation is all about, the motive of her allegation, which is pure political partisanship. So we'll open up the phone lines here. We'll take some calls. We have Jeff from Lancaster. You're on the Marc Scaringi Show. And what are your thoughts on the vote coming up in the next couple of hours?
I just want to remind everybody of the comment Andrew Wyatt made, who's the publicist for Bill Cosby, when Mr. Cosby was sent to prison, comparing Brett Kavanaugh's prosecution to Mr. Cosby's as unfair and unequal. And he made that comment as Mr. Cosby was being led off to prison in handcuffs. And this was a gentleman that said that, and I want everybody to realize on May 13th, 1985, 11 black people were killed by a bomb furnished by the FBI, and nobody was ever prosecuted for it. That was filmed. It was public, no prosecution, and nobody was even ever fired for that crime. All right?
All right, Jeff from Lancaster, thank you very much for pointing that out. Appreciate that comment. And the FBI, and we'll get into this in a little bit later, the involvement of a retired FBI agent named Monica McLean in the Dr. Christine Blasey Ford allegation. That's generated some interest by at least conservative media. Of course, it's being ignored by the mainstream media, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. If you'd like to call in and comment on the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings, on the speech made by United States Senator Susan Collins yesterday, the vote coming up in a few hours, the testimony of Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, call in 717-540-0580, 717-540-0580. As we were talking, the Hollywood left wing went, which is all of Hollywood, went berserk in response to the Susan Collins speech. But other liberals as well did the same. Interestingly, the Reverend Al Sharpton, he of the Tawana Brawley rape hoax fame, has castigated Trump's supporters for their embrace of Judge Brett Kavanaugh as those who would go to church and then go to a lynching after clothing themselves in morality. That's a pretty bold statement from the Most Holy Reverend Al Sharpton. And I want to ask my Trump supporter friends, how many of you have attended a lynching recently? I know I haven't. I haven't ever attended a lynching. And it's remarkable to me that this man, Al Sharpton, is given the pedestal and the spotlight to appear on mainstream media and make such outrageous, heinous allegations that Republicans who support Judge Brett Kavanaugh, after examining the evidence submitted by Dr. Ford and concluding that it was insufficient, unsubstantial, uncorroborated, and that she lacks credibility, we reached that conclusion based upon the evidence. And then Reverend Al Sharpton says that we're a bunch of people who would go out and attend a lynching. It really is remarkable. And, of course, he wasn't pushed back at all on those comments that he made, but it's just indicative of where the purported mainstream media is. That if you ask any serious questions to any liberal Democrat woman who's made a sex assault allegation against a Republican or a conservative, you are not only considered to be anti-woman, a misogynist, but now you are also a racist who supports lynchings, which is a little odd considering the accuser and the alleged perpetrator were both white. I'm not so sure how we become racist by not believing the accusations made by a white woman. That's an interesting take from the Reverend Al Sharpton. Remember, he was a big promoter and supporter of the Tawana Brawley rape hoax from the 80s. Some of our younger listeners may not recall, but that was the case of a New York girl, a 15-year-old girl, who alleged she was raped by 4 white men. The grand jury reviewed the evidence and determined that she was untruthful. It was false. The white men, including led by a New York prosecutor who was an accused perpetrator by Tawana Brawley, sued Brawley and the Reverend Al Sharpton for defamation and actually got a judgment, won the case, and got a judgment against the Reverend Al Sharpton for falsely accusing and defaming these 4 white men of $65,000. Not bad. Of course, the Reverend Al Sharpton didn't pay the judgment. He had his friends and supporters pay it, including Johnny Cochran, the famed O.J. Simpson defense attorney, came to his financial rescue. But that's a little off topic. But I just thought it was remarkable that the Reverend Al Sharpton, a man who has been successfully sued for defamation for supporting and promoting false rape accusations made by a 15-year-old girl in the 80s, is calling Republicans who don't believe the sexual assault allegations made by a then 15-year-old Dr. Christine Blasey Ford in the 80s as racists who would go out after church and attend a lynching. The irony is thick. Let me know what you think. Call in 717-540-0580. 717-540-0580. We're talking about the Judge Brett Kavanaugh confirmation to the United States Supreme Court. A vote is scheduled to take place in just a few hours, any time between 3 and 5 o'clock, I'm told. The full United States Senate will vote on the confirmation. Republicans are confident. Susan Collins was the linchpin and really turned the tide at the end there in favor of a confirmation vote, a favorable confirmation vote for Judge Kavanaugh. Immediately after Susan Collins gave that remarkable speech on the floor of the Senate, there was talk of a Democratic challenger to her, of course. Susan Rice, former President Barack Obama's national security advisor, answered a tweet asking who wants to run for the Senate in Maine with one word: me. So Susan Collins apparently is interested in running against, Susan Rice, Barack Obama's former national security advisor, is interested in running against Susan Collins for re-election because Susan Collins indicated that she will be voting for confirmation for Brett Kavanaugh. Remember Susan Rice? We talked about the Reverend Al Sharpton calling Republicans who support Brett Kavanaugh as racists and those who are about to attend a lynching. Remember Susan Rice. Susan Rice is the Obama official who took to every Sunday talk show after the Benghazi disaster and lied about the cause of that terrorist attack on our embassy in Benghazi. Remember, she lied. She claimed that the attack was in response to a video, when in fact it was a premeditated terrorist Al-Qaeda-sponsored attack against the United States armed forces there and our diplomats at our embassy in Benghazi. We'll talk more about the Judge Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearings and the upcoming vote when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Marc Scaringi Show.
Let's get back to The Marc Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to The Marc Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial where we put America first. Today we're talking about the confirmation of Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the United States Supreme Court. It's the biggest political and legal issue of the day, so that's why we're focused on it. Republicans were a little bit worried in the last couple of days leading up to the big vote. They were concerned that they may not have a sufficient number of votes, but United States Senator Susan Collins, Republican of Maine, took to the Senate floor yesterday, and with the nation's eyes upon her, gave a well-crafted and delivered speech in favor of confirming Judge Kavanaugh. That set off Hollywood. It set off the mainstream media. It set off the left here in America. They are apoplectic. They are they're focused really on they spent time condemning Susan Collins for abandoning women and abandoning survivors of sexual assault. So she has been under withering attack because she stood up for Brett Kavanaugh after explaining that the evidence submitted by Dr. Christine Blasey Ford was just not sufficient to sustain even the lowest burden of proof in the law, preponderance of the evidence in the civil law, that is. And so that was the most important factor, according to Susan Collins, and that she wouldn't allow, it wouldn't be fair to deny Brett Kavanaugh the nomination based upon insufficient evidence of an alleged sexual assault 36 years ago. So there's Susan Collins using reason, logic, analyzing the facts and the evidence and reaching a conclusion, and thus then is roundly condemned for it, of course. Democrats are fundraising off the Kavanaugh matter. Elizabeth Warren, a Democratic senator from the state of Massachusetts, sent out a fundraising email for MoveOn.org, the George Soros founded and led and sponsored a left-wing activist organization. Elizabeth Warren wrote, Kavanaugh proved that he's just an entitled judicial hitman, a partisan hack who peddles conspiracy theories against Democrats and could take out revenge on us, decision by decision, if he's confirmed. That is a United States senator referring to referring to the next justice on the United States Supreme Court as a judicial hitman. That's pretty remarkable, the language that Elizabeth Warren is using. It's pretty unhinged and so over the top, and of course without even an ounce or a scintilla of proof or credibility. Judge Kavanaugh, according to United States Senator Elizabeth Warren, could dismantle generations of gains, one court decision at a time, from reproductive rights to marriage equality to environmental protections and so much more. So we'll open up the phone lines and take some calls from our listeners on the confirmation hearings and the upcoming vote for Brett Kavanaugh for the United States Supreme Court. We have Mel from Perry County. You're on the Marc Scaringi Show.
Hi, thank you, Mark. We Republicans need to encourage the Democrats to make up a lot of noise and talk about killing and people dying horrible deaths, because the people out there hear this. They're fed up with that kind of nonsense. This isn't Christian. This isn't the United States. This is as intolerant as any communist outfit there is. We need to encourage them. After all, the last 4 elections, the Democrats lost, trying to say that Republicans hate the women and they hate the blacks and they hate the Hispanics. Tell them to keep it up. After all, what do you do when you keep doing the same thing and expect different results? We say they have mental problems. Well, they not only have mental problems, they're a wicked bunch, and we need to let people know.
Yeah, Mel from Perry County, I want to thank you for those comments and for your call. I think you're right on point, and I'll give you just a small example of that, of Michael Avenatti, the left-wing creepy porn lawyer, as he is referred, bringing up Julie Swetnick. Julie Swetnick made these horrible and heinous allegations that I don't even want to repeat on the radio, but they were so far-fetched and they were so off the wall that it really put a pall on all of the allegations made against Judge Brett Kavanaugh, and I think it helped United States Senator Susan Collins reach her determination. She even referenced the Julie Swetnick allegations as being so outlandish in her speech on the Senate floor yesterday. So I think that the Democrats, I agree with you, Mel from Perry County, a lot of smart Mels from Perry County. I married one, a Melanie from Perry County, by the way. That's who I thought was calling on the phone bank here. But you're right. The Democrats, the liberals, the left, they've gone so far off the scale in making these farcical and outlandish allegations against Brett Kavanaugh that they have engendered a huge opposition to the Democratic Party by mainstream America. They think that Republicans have lost the woman vote because Republicans are confirming Judge Brett Kavanaugh, who's accused of sexual assault 36 years ago. But I think that's completely wrong. I think that so many women are standing up and defending Brett Kavanaugh. Remember, women have husbands, they have sons, they have fathers, and women will use common sense, and they'll use reason, and they'll use logic, and they're looking at these allegations, they are looking at the facts, they're assessing the credibility of the witnesses, including Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. And so many of them are reaching what I think is the correct conclusion, that the evidence is just insufficient, it's insubstantial, it's not corroborated, and the doctor, although sincere, lacks credibility in certain very important ways, in key parts of her case are just riddled with evidentiary holes and credibility holes. And the women of America see that, and so I think the Democrats have overplayed their hand considerably. This has backfired. Not only did they not derail the Brett Kavanaugh nomination, Republicans are going to get Kavanaugh on the United States Supreme Court. We're going to find out in about an hour and a half or 2 hours from now. But I think that they have also engendered a groundswell of support out there in the heartland for Republican candidates running for the House of Representatives, the United States Senate, governor's races across the country, because the heartland of America has seen the horrible lengths and extents that the left wing will go to in order to try to obtain raw political power in destroying a decent and honorable man. And I think so many Americans are appalled, just appalled at the behavior of the Democrats. We'll take some more calls. We have Charlotte from Gettysburg. You're on the Marc Scaringi Show. What do you think about the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation vote?
Actually, I'm very pleased that it's going to confirm him, putting him as the next Supreme Court. I've been watching this every single part of it, every process. I've been reading every document, trying to find something that will lean me towards believing Ford's accusations. I haven't found any, but in the process of that, like today, they're showing some live feed of the protesters outside, and I heard one of the women screaming that she and a friend went to a drinking party and they both got drunk, and when she woke up, she discovered they had sex, and she said that she was raped because she was drunk. The point I'd like to make are to those who are with the I believe her group, or even not sure, think about your son that you're sending to college. Because if he picks up a girl at a party or at a bar and goes home, they have consensual sex, he's going to find himself in a situation where he didn't do anything wrong, but just her words are going to destroy their son's life and their life without any evidence at all, just because when she got sober, she realized that she did something stupid, and rather than accepting self-responsibility and accountability, she's going to blame the male.
Yeah, Charlotte, I think you're exactly right. So many women are reasonable and use common sense and understand that on occasion these things happen, and we can't use this to destroy the career of any person, man or woman. That we need the rule of law, we need evidence, we need to establish credibility. And those things were just not established in the case of Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. Charlotte, thanks for calling. Appreciate those thoughts. I think very poignant and on target. We'll talk more about the Judge Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearing when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to the Marc Scaringi Show.
Take care, Mark.
Now back to the Marc Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Marc Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial where we put America first and we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day. Today we're talking about the confirmation of Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the United States Supreme Court. All eyes are down and focused on Washington, D.C. today, right now. It's almost 2, but at 3:30. It appears the United States Senate will begin a vote on the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. Republicans are confident they have the number of votes necessary to put the judge over the top and into that esteemed court. We've heard from many callers today, and Charlotte from Gettysburg made some very excellent points. And I can remember one of the first criminal trials that I handled as a criminal defense attorney when I was a young man, much younger attorney, involved in attempted rape allegation raised by a woman against her boyfriend of many years, and they shared a child together. The allegations were believed by the prosecutor. Charges were brought, very severe, serious attempted rape allegations that carry very long prison sentences in the state prison. And I was appointed to represent this young man as a court-appointed public defender. And I remember just as the trial was about to commence, the district attorney offering my client 5 years in the state prison if he were to plead guilty to a crime my client maintains he did not commit. We rejected that plea, went to trial, and had a full day-long trial. The jury deliberated for about 30 minutes, came back with an acquittal on every single count charged. My client looked at me and said, "What do I do now?" And I said, "Well, now you leave this courthouse a free man." And it was a startling experience for me as a young lawyer. And Charlotte from Gettysburg is pointing out that there is such thing as a false allegation of rape. There's no question about that. And reasoned, rational men and women must examine the evidence and make a determination as to the credibility of the witnesses and use the rule of law to reach their decision, whether it's in civil court, criminal court, or in the United States Senate. We can't suspend these basic principles of Western civilization that help us have a civil society where we just don't destroy people and rip them apart and rip apart their careers and their lives based upon hearsay and innuendo. And clearly, in a case like this, where these allegations were, to me, so obviously politically motivated. This is Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, who is a lifelong Democrat, a donor to the Democratic Party, to Democratic candidates, a donor to the Bernie Sanders for President campaign. She marched in the women's marches. She wore that lovely pink hat. She even darned her own pink hat. She wrote signed letters denouncing Trump's policies as inhumane. She's represented by lawyers who self-describe as part of the resistance, who will by any means necessary destroy the Trump agenda. These are the facts. These are the serious credibility issues. These are the motives, in my opinion, surrounding these allegations. The Julie Swetnick outlandish, outrageous allegations promoted by the creepy porn lawyer Michael Avenatti, the lawyer for Stormy Daniels, who wants to run against President Trump for re-election. This is the state of our country, and it's a shame that these people had to go through this. It's a shame that Brett Kavanaugh's his reputation was destroyed, annihilated. Think about his wife sitting behind him in that Judiciary Committee hearing room. Think about his daughters at home hearing these horrible, heinous allegations raised against him without any corroboration of any kind and without anybody there, including Rachel Mitchell, the prosecutor hired by the Republicans, examining Dr. Ford for her bias and her motive. There was none of that. Had that occurred like it occurs in any civil or criminal trial, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford would have been laughed out of that committee hearing room. And that's the truth of the matter. And it's such a horrible shame what Brett Kavanaugh and his family has to endure, and it's a big taint on the republic. It's a big taint on our country and our republic and our Constitution and civil society and civil order that we've had to endure this sham. We'll take some more calls. We have Asa from Lancaster County. You're on the Marc Scaringi Show. What are your thoughts on the Kavanaugh confirmation?
Mark, thank you for taking my call. I kind of echo what you just mentioned. It's just an utter disgrace what they're doing, and just based on and you know what the worst part is? It's going to happen again. It's going to happen again. And you know why? Because the Democrats, what they can't get through the legislative process, you were just saying, whoever, Elizabeth Warren complaining about how all the policy gains are going to get lost. First of all, a legislature should not be worried about policy gains from a court. Every gain they have ever made, everything the left advances is through the judicial process, legislating from the bench. That's where their power is the courts. Because nobody votes for this, stuff, this malarkey. But the reason why I say it's going to happen again is, there's a reason why we have libel laws. There's a reason why we have slander laws. And after this is over, whether he's confirmed or not, I think he should go a full court and, sue. He should sue for libel. He should sue for slander. If he doesn't, the next time there's another nominee, they're going to do the same thing, whether it's sexism, sexual assault, racism. It's going to happen again.
Oh, I think you're exactly right, Asa, and thanks for calling. I'm going to hang up so I can respond to you and then get some other calls. But I think you're absolutely directly on point. I think it will continue to happen because this is how the left asserts its power. It can't win through the ballot box. It lost the Senate, it lost the House, it lost the Oval Office. Republicans control all three branches of government. So what are the Democrats doing? What's the left doing? They're using political activism to a heightened degree where it's political disruption. They're not just rallies and protests where speakers are engaging in free speech. They are attempting to physically disrupt the lawful political process. They are storming these Senate offices. They are, through sheer numbers, hundreds or thousands of these left-wing activists are getting into senators' faces and confronting senators' faces. They're occupying their offices. This is civil disorder and disruption. This is not free speech. This is the left using the raw force of using the raw power of physical force, and we're just seeing. Regrettably, I think we're seeing just the start of it. If it continues, it can quickly spiral out of control. Look at those Code Pink activists who cornered United States Senator Jeff Flake in the elevator. And Jeff Flake was too scared and timid to confront them. And they essentially entrapped and confined him in that space. And he's a United States Senator. Imagine how powerless the rest of us are in the face of this out of control, hysterical left wing. These members of Code Pink and Planned Parenthood and these other left wing advocacy groups are occupying the Senate buildings. They're occupying the senators' offices, and they are hounding and haunting these senators because they know that they're not going to win through the deliberative process. So they're going to use force, and they're going to scream, and they're going to try to do whatever they can to disrupt. And this is the way of the left. We've seen it throughout history. And when push comes to shove, it can certainly take us down a very, very dangerous path, the way the left wing has done many times throughout the course of history. And this Code Pink and all of these screaming memes down there revealed that the Dr. Ford allegations and these hearings convened to address them for what it was really all about. It was kind of a Me Too show trial, is really all it was. And that is a shame, and it's a real taint on the American Republic and our democracy, on our Constitution and the rule of law. And who among you out there in central Pennsylvania listening to this show, who among you wants to stand up and leave your private life and enter public service when this can be the response, that simply by wanting to do good for your fellow citizens and run for public office and throw your hat in the ring, this is what can happen to you if you want to become a public servant, if you espouse principles and philosophies that are opposed to what the left is demanding for our country. America's in a bad state at this point, but thankfully we have a man in the White House who is leading this country forward and to a better place. That's about all the time we have. Thanks for listening.